2020 Democratic presidential candidates are turning their attention to South Carolina this week. 22 presidential hopefuls will descend on the state Friday as Congressman Jim Clyburn hosts his annual world-famous fish fry in Columbia. The event is a chance for the candidates to address voters and rally support in a crucial southern state. My colleague, Elaine Quijano, is there. Ahead of the fish fry, she spoke to the chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party, Drew McKissick, who says he's not worried about the president's reelection.
Are there other Democratic candidates you think could pose more of a challenge to President Trump?
No, well, again, if you're talking about South Carolina or nationally, I mean, look, in South Carolina, the president is going to carry South Carolina. And it's not my job to be a pundit for other state parties and stuff. They know their areas better than I do. I'm chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party. My job is to win here.
What about
and there's
nationally?
no way that Donald Trump is going to lose South Carolina.
What about nationally?
Well, again, I'm not a pundit for the nation, but I expect Donald Trump to be reelected as president of the United States.
CBSN anchor Elaine Quijano joins us now from Columbia, South Carolina. Nice to see you there, Elaine. You sat down
Great to be with you, Don.
You sat down with the GOP party chair. So what else did he have to say ahead of this vaunted fish fry?
So I asked him, are you going to be paying attention? And he kind of sat back, laughed, and said, oh, I'll be watching with some popcorn. But as the state Republican Party chair, he said the reason he's going to be watching is because, in his view, when describing the state of the Democratic field right now, he said, quote, it's like Baskin Robbins. You've got 23 flavors of socialism right now. And so what I asked him about right before that clip that you just ran was about Joe Biden. You recall that the former vice president said recently that, in fact, he could win South Carolina, he said, in 2020. I asked Chairman McKissick about that. Again, he laughed. He said, it's just not going to happen, that this is very solidly Trump country. And he said he believes once the Democratic primary is over, he doesn't think you'll see Joe Biden in the state of South Carolina again.
Well, why is you think South Carolina such a crucial state for presidential hopefuls?
You know, it's one of the first early voting states, and it's also one of the most diverse early voting states. We have been talking about how here in the Palmetto State, when you look at the Democratic primary electorate, black voters make up about 60% of those voters. So it's a place where some candidates have already made multiple visits ahead of this fish fry, and they're here to communicate their ideas and their messages, particularly with those audiences that are primarily audiences where there are people of color. We saw this over this past weekend here. There was a forum, a presidential forum by the Black Economic Alliance, in which we saw Senator Elizabeth Warren, we saw South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, we saw Beto O'Rourke, we saw Cory Booker, all of them talking about the issues around racial equality. Those are issues that are obviously very resonant here in the state. And beyond that, it's a test for these candidates to also see how they can hone their messages. How is it that they can appeal not just to voters here in South Carolina, but also those voters of color across the United States as this Democratic contest continues?
Wow, they're going to have the get out the vote is going to be very important to them. If 60% minority there, and yet the head of the Republican Party there says it's going to definitely go for Trump. So, all right, so you spoke to the vice president of the University of South Carolina, Democrats as well, Hannah Hart, and you asked her about how age is playing into their assessment of the Democratic field. So we want to listen to a little bit of that right now.
I wouldn't say age isn't a factor, but when looking at the candidates that a lot of us do support, I mean, we've got people from Bernie Sanders down to Mayor Pete. So, I mean, I don't think age is the biggest factor, and I don't think that's the reason people aren't too much into Biden either.
So if not age, then what else are they looking for from a young person's perspective in terms of their priorities?
So it's interesting. Climate change is the thing that she said, both sort of personally, she's anecdotally kind of talked to her fellow college Democrats about, but also she did a survey here on campus and found that when it came to prioritizing what matters most for young people, it's the issue of climate change. And I said, well, are people just not talking about it on the Democratic side enough for you? And she said, that's it. People are mentioning it, but it's not to the level of detail that she would like to hear. She talked about the Green New Deal. feel being important. And interestingly, so we asked the question about age. I also asked about gender because, of course, you have quite a number of female candidates running on the Democratic side. And she said there is an openness to the idea of having a woman in that position, that executive position, and that it doesn't seem to really be a factor in the discussions that she's just been having sort of anecdotally with her fellow college Democrats. So we covered a lot of topics, but really first and foremost, at top of her mind, at the top of a lot of people's minds, young voters here, climate change continues to be sort of a driving issue they just want to hear more about.
Well, it makes sense. That's their future. They're going to have to live in this earth, whatever the conditions are. All right. So what else are you going to be watching for ahead of this fish fry?
So we're going to actually be sitting down on Thursday with a group of voters, and it'll be really interesting because one of the things that we learned from the latest CBS News Battleground Tracker poll is that here in the state of South Carolina, the issue of faith is something that matters quite a bit to the Democratic electorate. And that's something that's different than other early voting states. And so the voters that we're going to be talking to, as I understand it, a lot of them are regular churchgoers. And so I'm interested to hear how it is that faith sort of enters into not just their own sort of personal day-to-day kind of lives, but politically, how does that shape their evaluation of the candidates? Is it something that they feel they are wanting to hear more about? Is it something that they've already started to form opinions about based on what they've already heard from some candidates? So that's an issue I think that hasn't quite been explored fully yet, and I'm really interested to hear what they say about that.
That's a great question. Very few of these candidates have been talking about their faith, other than perhaps Pete Buttigieg on the campaign trail. He's been very open about this. So great question. I look forward to hearing that. Elaine Quijano, thanks so much for spending some time with us.
You're welcome.
And we're going to have much more on the 2020 race this Friday when Red and Blue goes on the road to Columbia, South Carolina. 22 Democratic presidential candidates are attending Congressman Jim Clyburn's annual fish fry. Elaine Quijano, Major Garrett, they both anchor our coverage there beginning Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on CBSN.